Ocean travel in antiquity was an industrial, kinetic fight against the elements. To understand the Roman economy, we must start with a baseline mathematical problem. The capital city held 1 million people. Keeping them from starving and rioting required hundreds of thousands of tons of grain every single year. The surplus required to meet this massive demand came almost entirely from one location, the distant agricultural province of Egypt. This map shows the staggering geographic barrier dividing the supply from the demand, isolating the capital from its lifeblood across the Mediterranean Sea. Moving this volume over land was mathematically impossible. Draft animals require food, meaning a terrestrial caravan would consume its own cargo long before reaching Italy. It had to go by sea. The survival of the ancient world's most powerful empire was structurally built on an ongoing, high-stakes logistical hostage situation dictated by the ocean. But the sea operated on its own strict schedule. The Romans faced the Mare Clausum, the closed sea, a hard, immutable period from November to March. During these months, deep winter weather systems generated extreme storms that rendered the Mediterranean wildly unpredictable and practically unnavigable for heavy freighters. Looking at the standard shipping lanes from Alexandria to Italy, we can see the regular flow of trade. But when the winter weather arrives, it physically severs the empire's supply line, shutting down movement entirely. This constraint forced a brutal reality onto the state. They had a narrow, high-pressure window in the summer to transport millions of tons of cargo. The stakes of missing this window were absolute. If a late storm wiped out a fleet, or if delays pushed the voyage past the sailing season, capital starvation was guaranteed before spring. The ocean separated Rome from its food, but it also imposed a merciless, time-gated schedule that required perfectly synchronized, industrial-scale maritime operations. Standard coastal galleys could never move cargo at this volume. To solve the math of the Alexandria-Rome run, engineers built the naves honorariae, specialized deep-draft heavy freighters. This stone relief depicts the physical bulk of these merchant vessels, highlighting the massive hull depth and heavy rigging required to sail them. These ships were colossal, capable of hauling upwards of 1,000 tons of bulk grain in a single sustained voyage. Supporting that payload required specialized engineering, including lead-sheathed hulls to prevent water seepage into the grain, and massive heavy steering oars to control the immense drag of the ship. The capital expenditure needed to harvest the massive timber, construct the frame, and rig a single vessel of this magnitude was staggering. Feeding Rome required an entire industrial fleet of these highly specialized superfreighters. Here is the central paradox of Roman logistics. The imperial state did not actually own or operate this massive merchant fleet. Instead, they relied entirely on the Navicularii, highly capitalized private shipping guilds that stepped in to fill this critical infrastructure void. This mosaic explicitly documents the existence of the Navicularii, cementing their title in the Latin text directly above the depiction of the ship. This introduces immediate economic friction. No rational private shipowner would willingly risk their incredibly expensive fleet on a perilous, mandated timeline with extreme financial guarantees. To incentivize them, the state deployed a massive macroeconomic intervention, offering total tax exemptions and lucrative civic bonuses to merchants who dedicated their fleets strictly to the grain trade. They also instituted state-backed shipwreck insurance. If a cargo was lost to a violent winter storm, the Roman emperor personally absorbed the financial ruin, keeping the private guild solvent. This data chart compares the staggering capital loss of a sunken freighter on the left against the vastly higher cost of deploying legions to suppress a citywide famine riot on the right. Rome kept its empire alive by outsourcing its most critical existential function to private capital, deliberately de-risking the maritime industry to ensure the cargo never stopped moving. After weeks at sea, the fleets reached the Italian coastline, but here they hit a terminal bottleneck. Rome's natural geography, specifically the shallow, meandering Tiber River, was physically disastrous for deep-draft oceanic freighters. The naves honorariae could not sail upriver to the capital. The massive influx of grain piled up, creating a devastating traffic jam right at the coast. The state responded with brute force infrastructure. They dredged and constructed artificial deep-water harbor basins at Portus, seen in these massive brick structures built alongside the water. Directly adjacent, Ostia Antica was expanded into a massive industrialized warehouse district, utilizing this sweeping footprint of brick ruins to temporarily hold the unloaded grain. Inside these facilities, the cargo was meticulously organized and stored in tightly packed, uniform rows of terracotta amphorae. Mastering the open ocean was completely meaningless without the artificial, heavily engineered coastal infrastructure required to catch and process the incoming tonnage. This created the final, grueling later problem. Tens of thousands of tons of grain now sat deep inside ship hulls, requiring manual extraction. This work fell to the staggering, highly organized dockworker guilds whose sole purpose was hauling this dead weight. On the left side of this mosaic, we see rigorous state oversight, using a large mechanical scale to precisely document cargo weights. Moving to the right, the physical toll becomes clear as laborers manually carry the heavy bulk material. The staggering hauled the grain from the heavy freighters into naves catacariae, specialized shallow draft barges engineered explicitly for the Tiber. This initiated the true final mile, moving these heavily laden barges upstream against the strong river current. Looking at the fast-moving, turbulent water of the Tiber River here, the physical resistance fighting against the barges is undeniable. The engine driving this final push was biological. Teams of oxen were yoked to the barges, marching along the riverbanks to drag the weight against the flow. The tension transferred directly through thick hemp rope, violently vibrating as the hooves of the oxen dug deeply into the wet river mud. This established a relentless, exhausting daily rhythm, a constant loop of dragging, endless heavy hauling, and dockside unloading, required entirely to keep the capital fed for one more day. The grandeur of the Roman Empire was sustained by an unbroken, tightly managed chain of maritime logistics, fueled by private capital, intense state intervention, and the raw physical labor of the guilds.